As of April 7th, 2025, when I am writing this video, Israel now controls 50% of Gaza, destroying an unimaginable amount of homes, farmland, and lives to get there, with even more destruction to come as new Israeli outposts are built in the rubble. It has completely shut off any food, medicine, or other aid coming into the borders, denying entry of humanitarian orgs while targeting medical infrastructure at the same time, killing or otherwise affecting 1 million children in the process. Quoting a UNICEF report, "No food, fuel, medicine, or other essentials have been allowed into the Gaza Strip since March 2nd, 2025, and supplies are rapidly running out, putting 1 million children in serious danger." After almost 18 months of war in the Gaza Strip, more than 15,000 children have reportedly been killed, over 34,000 reportedly injured, and nearly 1 million children repeatedly displaced and deprived of their right to basic services. Since March 2nd, 2025, no aid or commercial goods have been allowed into Gaza, the longest period of aid blockage since the start of the war. Supplies built up during the 2-month ceasefire are rapidly running out, creating a critical food shortage. Without these vital supplies, malnutrition, diseases, and other preventable conditions will likely surge, leading to an increase in preventable child deaths. And 2 heartbreaking interviews within that report. "We have nothing left," said 9-year-old Noor, whose family has been displaced over and over again. "Our 3 daily meals now depend on the rice we receive from charity kitchens." On March 20th, Noor's family was forced to move yet again, this time to Gaza City. "We arrived here with nothing but a few clothes," Noor continued. "There is nothing available here. Sometimes water is provided by water trucks, but other times there is none. There are no bathrooms. I just wish for this war to end. I feel lonely and scared inside the tent. I am afraid I won't wake up the next morning. Yesterday, we fled Beit Hanoun under artillery shelling and airstrikes. Death was everywhere," said 11-year-old Leon, who is sheltering with her family in Gaza City. "The war started when I was 9 years old. Now I am 11. I don't even know how I grew up. Stop the war." Israel has also targeted multiple journalists and activists seemingly for speaking out against Israel's war crimes. People like Oscar-winning director of the film No Other Land, Hamdan Bilal, or his co-director Bassel Adra, who said after witnessing Bilal's arrest, "We came back from the Oscars, and every day since there is an attack on us," Adra told the Associated Press. "This might be the revenge on us for making the movie. It feels like a punishment." A punishment that activists also got on the very same day, having their vehicles attacked, just like Hassam Shabat, who was killed after reporting in Gaza for 18 months. His vehicle was targeted with no warning for the crime of speaking out against Israel, meeting the same fate so many others faced before and after him, with 2024 being the deadliest year for journalists of all time. This comes on the tail end of a supposed ceasefire deal, which by all accounts seemingly never really took place, at least on Israel's side. In this video, I want to examine the timeline of events since January 19th, the day the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal went into effect, day by day at least to the end of January, to show the many examples of Israel and America disrespecting not only the spirit of the deal, but also the actual stipulations of it, and showing their blatant disregard for Palestinians as a people. I will then do a quicker look at the events after January and the effects of them up to what is now the continuance of the genocide in Gaza, starting on March 18th. Back to January 19th, 2 days after Israel killed 86 and injured hundreds in a string of last attacks before the ceasefire fully went into effect with the release of the names of 3 hostages in Hamas captivity. The initial ceasefire deal that was worked out would result in 3 phases. The first phase, and the only one that we would ever see come into effect, would see that Hamas would release 33 out of 251 Israeli hostages taken, and hundreds of Palestinian prisoners would be released by Israel. Although both of these final trade numbers would be different by the end, 25 hostages from Hamas and 1,900 prisoners from Israel, respectively. 1,900 out of their nearly 7,000 prisoners, including children, as of 2023, according to Human Rights Watch, and using their same source, nearly 10,000 as of 2025 according to Homoket. Nearly 3,500 of these prisoners, including children sometimes taken away in night raids, also known as kidnapping to the rest of us, are held as administrative detainees without any evidence or trial, meaning these people are essentially hostages of the government. These prisoners are also commonly victims of assaults and torture, simply on the basis of being Palestinian. Examples include sexual assault, dog attacks, psychological torture, and Israel's favorite, the abuse of kids, with a military court watch reporting that in 22 cases of minors being detained in 2023, 64% said they were physically abused, while 73% said they were strip searched by Israeli forces while in detention. All this to say and show that abuse of Palestinians is kind of Israel's bread and butter. These Palestinians are victims and are often being locked away and abused on no charges, with no due process. Regardless of a ceasefire, these people deserve rights. It's just another glaring sign that Israel does not respect Palestinians in any way. Many cases and reports similar to these taking place long before October 7th. I'm simply keeping this recent to show the absolute abundance of abuses Israel commits. Moving on. This deal would also see Israel withdraw/loosen their grip on many key points and corridors within and surrounding Gaza. Israel warning any threats will be met with a forceful response. Both phrases are defined by Israel with no evidence needed, a reoccurring theme throughout this video. The deal was reliant on no attacks from either side within or coming out of Gaza, although Israel took this opportunity to dispel more than 40,000 Palestinians from the West Bank using Operation Iron Wall, not breaking the ceasefire in true terms, but once again putting down any idea of mutual respect between Israelis and Palestinians. This displacement was done through a mix of bombing, bulldozing, and general destruction by the IDF and settlers alike, many times in conjunction with each other, like when Ben-Gvir gave out 10,000 rifles to civilian security teams and West Bank settlers. Of course, that's before the ceasefire, so here's Israel destroying refugee camps in February of 2025, along with cutting the electricity and water to the camps, considered collective punishment, which is a war crime. These war crimes have left many people with nowhere to go, some camps being completely destroyed in the process. But we will get to that. On the next day, January 20th, Israel released 90 prisoners in trade for 3 hostages of Hamas. Israel also let 600 aid trucks into Gaza, showing an actual move forward within the deal. Just for Trump to also lift sanctions that were placed on the far-right settler group Amana, an immediate step backwards. Amana being responsible for violence and contributing to a massive amount of land theft, which is the reason the group was sanctioned in the first place by multiple countries. This theft of farmland an extremely common theme of Israelis' illegal occupation. These sanctions being lifted was a clear sign of disrespect for the Palestinians as a whole, disregarding the right they have to live and farm their own lands. Again, this is not just about a disdain for Hamas or Gazans, as liberal Zionists like to call them. This is a hate of Palestinians as a people, with many politicians in Israel's government outright dehumanizing and calling for genocide. Which is why the IDF couldn't help beginning their West Bank operations in joint company with Trump's settler assistance on the very next day, January 21st. Israel launches their operations in the West Bank, which will go on to displace 40,000 with a bang, killing 9 people. On the same day as 900 aid trucks are allowed into Gaza, bringing the total to 2,400 trucks, after months of Israel previously denying access into the Strip, only allowing 12 aid trucks within a 2.5-month span, with 3 of those 12 having the aid interrupted by bombs being dropped on the schools they brought it to. 3 separate incidents. And although these 9 deaths in the West Bank and blocking of aid trucks pre-ceasefire were not technically a break in the deal, it is again a clear indication of the apathy towards Palestinian life demonstrated by Israel. These next deaths, however, are breaks in the ceasefire, the first being 1 child in Rafah killed by Israeli snipers, with video evidence of them firing at a man attempting to retrieve the boy's body included. And the second being an alleged militant. claiming that the militant posed a threat to their forces. Not even an actual shot towards them or a verbal threat, simply posed a threat by existing near them. This was coupled with settlers and the IDF destroying homes and cars in the West Bank, simply continuing the Gazification of the area. To explain that, a quote from the head of Jenin Government Hospital, Dr. Wissam Baker. It felt like the same scenes from Gaza were playing out in the West Bank, especially the closure of and siege imposed on hospitals, the prevention of movement to and from the facility, and the attacks on medical staff. So, with the deal broken, even acknowledged by mainstream Western media, although not explicitly, apparently it's still on shaky grounds, let's see how Israel proceeds over the coming days, knowing they can get away with anything, even a blatant disregard for human life in the middle of a supposed ceasefire. On January 24th, Israel killed 2 with a drone strike in the West Bank, hitting a vehicle that had a supposed terrorist cell inside. Followed by a 2-year-old on the next day, January 25th, this one coming straight from Israeli news sources. The toddler was killed during an IDF tactic known as a pressure cooker, which is a fancy name for shooting at a building until everyone runs out or dies. The girl's pregnant mother was injured during this shooting as well. The day ended with a 42-year-old Palestinian man's death, who passed from gunshot wounds after an Israeli raid days earlier targeting freed prisoners near a refugee camp. The Israeli army using snipers and tear gas during this raid, leading to his death. Then, on January 26th, Israel blocks thousands of people from returning to Gaza, ultimately resorting to firing on the crowd, killing 2 and wounding 9, including a child. Israel claiming they fired warning shots because the crowd posed a threat, as all of Israel's victims somehow do. This was on the same day that they killed 22 Lebanese people who were protesting their Israeli occupation and also attempting to return home. Again, the victims seemed to pose a threat to the IDF before being killed by warning shots. Followed up by January 27th when 2 big things came out. One being the many pictures and articles of Palestinians returning to the destroyed remains of Gaza. And 2 being a study published by Oxfam International showing Israel had not improved the humanitarian access conditions of Gaza at all pre-ceasefire since ordered by the ICC a year prior, leading to an untold number of deaths. I mean, just look at these survey numbers. The survey, conducted among NGOs including Oxfam, Islamic Relief, Médecins du Monde, ActionAid, and the Norwegian Refugee Council, reveals how Israel systematically denied and restricted aid supplies and services both into and within Gaza since the ICJ ruling on the 26th of January 2024. 89% of those completing the survey said that Israeli actions regarding the provision of aid had worsened since the ICJ's ruling. 93% said the humanitarian situation for the people receiving their aid and services had deteriorated. 100% of surveyed agencies importing humanitarian supplies into Gaza said the Israeli procedures for aid entry were either ineffective, had systemically impeded the humanitarian response, or were insufficient to meet the huge needs. 94% of aid workers from the reporting organizations had been displaced at least once, many of them multiple times. 93% of aid agencies surveyed had to forcibly relocate their operations at least once since the ICJ ruling, mainly due to Israeli displacement orders and military offensives. Almost all have had to relocate multiple times. And this quote by Oxfam's policy lead, "Given the volume of aid now entering Gaza, it is clear how much Israel has been obstructing the humanitarian response for the last 15 months. As the survey shows, Israel completely failed to improve humanitarian conditions in disregard of international law, while systematically preventing life-saving aid from getting in." Oxfam's policy lead, Bushara Khalidi. Oh, and of course, Israel killed 2 more in the West Bank, although this time they were actually confirmed militants, a rare case for the IDF. January 28th brings us the banning of UNRWA, going into effect again harming the ceasefire. UNRWA being an organization which does nothing but assist Palestinians who are victims of the Israeli genocide with food, aid, and shelter. This chart showing how much good they do and how much they suffer in the process to do that good. This ban, disregarding the need for aid in the Gaza Strip and again ignoring the ICC's order to increase assistance in the area. Speaking of disregarding Palestinians, on January 29th, the IDF killed 12 in the West Bank, actually opting to bleed one man to death rather than allow him to get medical attention. These victims were claimed to be terrorists, although Hamas did not claim them as they had previously when accused, almost as if they were innocent. But yet, despite all of that, on the next day, January 30th, another hostage trade would come through. 8 hostages from Hamas and 110 prisoners from Israel's stockpile of people. This handover bringing out quite a large crowd, which I can only imagine was hard for Israel not to bomb. Despite the breaking of the ceasefire, despite the children being killed in broad daylight on camera, Hamas returned to the table and actually traded hostages, when in all fairness, they have no reason to, besides Israel's massive leverage. Capping off January was the infamous CNN footage of Gaza, showing miles and miles of rubble in what used to be people-filled streets and homes. The footage is devastating and heartbreaking, yet this process is still ongoing. There was no ceasefire, there was no end to the destruction, there was simply a pause in the outright slaughter of Palestinians. What good does a ceasefire do when all your land looks like this? Where do you even go? Now, let's get to today and see what happened along the way. February 9th, the IDF kills 3 in Gaza, citing their fear of being approached, which adds to the Euromed Human Rights Monitor's documents of at least 110 killed since the ceasefire was implemented. 6 people a day. So much for a ceasefire. Then Trump vowed to take control of Gaza, which can't be good for ceasefire talks either, but what do I know? The next day, UNRWA says 40,000 have been displaced in the West Bank, which is what I have been referencing throughout this video, saying, in 2024, more than 60% of displacement was a result of Israeli forces' operations. And finally, on February 11th, Hamas makes a response to all of this, but especially the Trump comments, and states they will no longer release any hostages. In response, the IDF says they will reinforce areas around Gaza with defense forces. All of this happening while the UN warns not enough tents are reaching Gaza. And yet, once again, Hamas shows up to the table to deal, exchanging another round of captives for prisoners, Israel keeping their new security reinforcements around Gaza while inviting Marco Rubio for a tour. Sadly, when your enemies are some of the most well-funded armies in the world who get away with anything they want to, you can't really hold them accountable for breaking the deal at all, so move on they must. Of course, playing nice with Israel also gets you nothing because on February 16th, the IDF struck in Gaza, killing 3 Palestinian police who were assisting with aid trucks. Once again, the IDF cited its fear of people walking towards them as the reason for the killings. Once again, breaking the actual terms of the ceasefire, although that clearly doesn't matter. On February 19th, a spokesperson for Hamas said they would be willing to actually release all of the captives in an effort to end the war, then went on to release the bodies of 4 hostages in the following day. Although, with a slight mistake which was quickly corrected, these were again more good faith signs that Hamas was willing to cooperate and work with the Israeli government. This mistake was absolutely dragged by the Israeli media and politicians as a purposeful disrespectful action taken on Hamas's part. I guess the IDF would prefer they simply be buried under rubble forever, how they prefer to do their victims. Interestingly enough, back in November of 2023, Hamas had already said the IDF actually did just that. Israel, in response to this incident, delayed the release of 600 prisoners until February 25th, when an agreement was reached again. Lucky for the IDF, unlike Hamas, they have a never-ending supply of prisoners to trade with as they just can't stop arresting them within the West Bank. 365, again, including children since the latest incursion, which just happened to come with tanks this time, adding to the Gazification idea that is clearly being exercised in the West Bank, which is actually said by the defense minister himself. On the 26th, Human Rights Watch backed up that claim with an article saying the displacement was reaching unprecedented levels, citing the UN's assertion that many Palestinians were being killed while posing no threat, completely unarmed. Israel then decided to break the ceasefire further by refusing to leave the Philadelphia corridor, citing weapons smuggling concerns, further sullying the agreement to the point of it basically being null by the end of the second month. But there's always worse to come, as on March 2nd, Israel decided to block all aid into Gaza, including fuel, shutting down the Palestinians' ability to receive clean water or medicine, which will go on to heavily affect the 1.1 million children of the area most of all, Israel forcing much of these life-saving supplies to sit inside warehouses rather than go out to the people in need. This was followed by March 7th, when a drone strike killed 2 supposed militants in Gaza, breaking the ceasefire once again. It almost becomes useless to even say, but it's necessary to show how little Israel cares about recognizing a deal they agreed to or recognizing international law. Funnily enough, on the same day the government's own people who were held captive by Hamas were begging for the government to continue on with the ceasefire and to not break it apart, saying in a letter, "We who were kidnapped during the October 7th massacre experienced on our flesh the hell from which our loved ones have yet to return. We saw the darkness, heard the horrors, breathed in the fear. We know and are not just describing what the hostages left behind are going through: brutal torture, humiliating hunger, sickness without treatment, abysmal loneliness. That is the reality in these moments. Every minute there is hell. Every additional moment is a potential death sentence." Israel was founded to defend the Jewish people, but on October 7th it failed. The only way to begin atoning for this resounding failure is to bring back all the hostages, the living for rehabilitation and the dead for a proper burial in the soil of Israel. This may be their last chance. So, of course, for their citizens, on March 9th, the IDF rolled a car off a cliff in the West Bank, then proceeded to cut electricity to Gaza, both being emblematic of Israel's feeling towards Palestinians, and one seemingly a punishment for Hamas not accepting an extension on the ceasefire, rather than moving to the second phase, which would have seen all the hostages freed, dead and alive. March 11th. Israel kills 8 in Gaza, plus 3 in the West Bank, and the next day begins an investigation into themselves on whether or not they forced Palestinians to enter booby-trapped homes and use them as human shields. Inevitably, they will find no wrongdoing, obviously. Quoting a CNN article, "In an interview with CNN late last year, an Israeli soldier said his unit had forced a Palestinian man to enter a building ahead of troops. If there are any booby traps, they will explode, and not us," he explained. The practice was reportedly so common in the Israeli military that it had a name, Mosquito Protocol. The exact scale and scope of the practice by the Israeli military is not known, but the testimony of both the soldier and 5 civilians last year indicated that it was widespread across the territory in northern Gaza, Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and Rafah. One of the civilians, Mohammed Saad, aged 20, told CNN that IDF soldiers had detained him in Rafah. "They would ask us to do things like move this carpet, saying they were looking for tunnels. Film under the stairs, they would say. If they found something, they would tell us to bring it outside. For example, they would ask us to remove belongings from the house, clean here, move the sofa, open the fridge, and open the cupboard." At the time of CNN's report, in October, the IDF said that military protocols strictly prohibit the use of detained Gaza civilians for military operations. Not a good look. The next day, UN experts accuse Israel of genocidal acts and sexual-based violence in Gaza, a reoccurring theme in many accusations towards Israel. Israel's response? They killed 2 children in Gaza with drone strikes. Over the next few days leading up to the restarting of Israel's bombing campaign, the violence was increased to an absurd degree. 3 houses and a number of cars are burned in the West Bank on March 14th, while on the 15th, 4 children are killed in Gaza, along with 3 journalists and 2 others. quoting an NBC article where the mother of 2 children killed speaks. On Friday, 2 months since the fragile ceasefire in Gaza was declared, Al-Arfan, back in Gaza City with her family, was preparing the meal to break the day's Ramadan fast. 2 of her sons, Mahmoud Al-Arfan, 15, and Yusuf Al-Arfan, 13, stepped outside just for a moment just to find firewood for their evening meal. But an Israeli drone found them first, firing the missile that killed the boys and tearing Al-Arfan's life apart. 2, both of them in one day, she screamed, stained with her son's blood as she wept into their lifeless bodies. 2 of their friends, Malik Alatha, 13, and Salim Hasnin, 15, who had joined them to gather firewood, were also killed. And to cap it off, before the bombardment of Gaza, Yemen was bombed as well, this time by Israel's best friend and closest ally, America, killing 53, including 5 children. This bombing being an attempt to stop Houthi militants targeting ships which are facilitating in the genocide of Palestinians. Finally, we get to where the ceasefire was supposedly truly broken, again, at least admittedly this time by Israel, in a preemptive strike offering no evidence of what they were preventing or where they needed to strike, killing at least 404 and wounding 562, including many women and children. Hamas calling out the obvious contradiction of bombing the area holding your own people. What happened because of this? Nothing, as always, and so they continued. March 24th, Hassam Shabat is killed, targeted for journalism. March 25th, Oscar winner Hamdan Bilal is beaten and kidnapped by the IDF on no charges, targeted for journalism. March 26th, the UN says no aid at all has entered Gaza in 3 weeks. No food, no medicine, no tents, nothing. The UN saying 38 had been killed in the previous 24 hours, targeted for being Palestinian. And then, in one of Israel's most blatant mistakes yet, on March 31st they were found to have killed 15 medics, buried them in a shallow grave, some with their hands tied according to witnesses, and then claimed they couldn't tell they were real medics and they felt threatened, supposedly only seeing a darkened vehicle approaching with no lights or identification, just for video to release proving they were lying by showing the ambulance had lights the entire time. To quote a BBC article, the IDF initially denied the vehicles had their headlights or emergency signals on, but in response to the new video, the IDF told the BBC all claims, including the documentation circulating about the incident, will be thoroughly and deeply examined to understand the sequence of events and the handling of the situation. A surviving paramedic previously told the BBC that the ambulances were clearly marked and had their internal and external lights on. The latest video, which the PRCS said had been shown to the UN Security Council, shows the marked vehicles drawing to a halt on the edge of the road, lights still flashing, and at least 2 emergency workers stepping out wearing reflective clothing. Once again showing that if Israel thinks it can get away with something, it will try, regardless of what deal is in place, regardless of what is right or wrong. As long as it benefits their country, Israel is willing to lie, cheat, kill, and steal to benefit the ethnostate of Israel, to hurt Palestinians. Even as they kill 15 medics on video, even as they kill 100 kids a day and rob so many more of a childhood, even when they decimate a land and make it unlivable, killing refugees, aid workers, and innocents alike, to quote an UNOCHA report. 65% of the Gaza Strip's territory is within no-go areas under active displacement orders or both. Over 280,000 people have been displaced in the past 2 weeks. The number of aid workers killed since October 2023 rises to 409. Gaza faces renewed risk of hunger and malnutrition as the full cargo blockade, now entering the 2nd month, almost halts all flour distribution and shuts all subsidized bakeries. Children in Gaza bear the brunt of violence and displacement, which heighten the risk of family separation. even when they kill their own allies, the ones who fund all of their genocidal fantasies, through a shooting, or crushing by a bulldozer, or any other way they choose at the time. Even when they take over 50% of a land and target the people who attempt to expose the clear theft, they will portray themselves as the victim, as the ones who were forced to break a ceasefire, forced to steal land. The truth is, there was no ceasefire. This was never for the hostages or the people of Israel or whatever the government says in defense of all of this. You don't bomb the land your hostages are being held in. You don't deprive the land of medical equipment when your people are being held there as well. There was only ever one deal the whole time, between America and Israel to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. The ceasefire was just a cover, a mask of progress covering the ongoing genocide behind it.